Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of ClearHead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions. Everyone has their own challenges to face. But have you ever considered yourself to be an obstacle in your own mental health journey? Whether you're aware of it or not, it's easier than you think to find yourself in your own mental prison, letting certain doubts and beliefs hold you back from unlocking your full potential. Today's guest is Dr. Paul Wood, best-selling author of How to Escape from Prison and Mental Fitness. And he'll be sharing how to use your experience to inspire to lift up rather than hold you down. Paul himself has dealt with his own fair share of grief, fear, and troubling times, overcoming situations that felt hopeless and a 10-year prison sentence. This is not a metaphor. He really did go to prison. And that meant that he could become a beacon of hope for those who had faced similar circumstances. Now he is a thriving husband, father, and speaker, and is dedicated to helping people become mentally fit and free, and able to turn their darkest moment into valuable lessons that make them stronger and more equipped to build a life they are proud of. I think that everyone here is super excited to listen to you, Dr. Paul. So welcome.
Thank you so much for that really gracious intro. I am super excited to have the opportunity to be talking to you. Really grateful to be here. The stuff we're going to talk about is stuff that matters, so appreciate it.
Yes, and before you came on, we had some technical difficulties and how it is such, life throws all these little challenges at you, and how do you make sure you don't flip out and that actually we just stay calm, we troubleshooted our way through it, and then now we get to kind of share your valuable experiences with everyone.
Well, this is the thing. Maybe you stayed calm, Angela. I didn't. I didn't stay calm, but I'll tell you what, I got focused. And actually, I was thinking about how experience in the lead into this is such a great example of how different my mindset and interpretation of my emotional experience is now. And sorry, I've just got to jump in it because it is so relevant, that setup. And all of you tuning in, you know those technical issues. You know the Zoom lag or the Teams kicking you out and the rest of it. And so we try to set this up. We know you're here and you matter to us. We want this to happen. And we can't get it working. We can't hear Angela. We can't get on the platform. All sorts of issues. And I was feeling quite anxious. Now, previously, when I was growing up, I would have thought that was a sign of weakness and that I wasn't who I was supposed to be as a man in terms of how I was socialized growing up. Whereas now what I recognize is, that is a signal that my body is sending me to get me focused to mitigate a future potential risk. And the antidote for that anxiety is action, is problem solving. And so you were all good, Angela, you're calm as, whereas me, I'm like anxious, focused, trying to get this happening. And so again, for me, that's such an example of how your perception makes such a difference.
100%. And I think from my end, internally, I was feeling all sorts. I could feel like my heart rate racing. I could feel like, my skin prickling. I felt really uncomfortable because I knew that we had a clock ticking and we needed to solve this problem. And so I felt all the emotions, but I think what you and I have learned in our journey is to kind of say, I'm feeling all those things, but I'm not going to let myself be trapped by that. I'm just going to say, what am I going to do that will solve this problem and move forward? So whether it's try log in with a different account, try and plug the mic in a different, plug hole. So whatever that is, right? But, I think it's a nice way to start today's session because I think each and every one of us encounter the chaos of life every day and we can easily let it really get to us. So I think maybe before we go into all of that, I love to hear your story, Paul. How did you find yourself in prison? And then how did you realize that actually the real prison is the prison of your mind? And then, let's get into all the truth bombs that are gonna come.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, I was born in the late 70s, and so most of my formative years were in the 80s and the early 90s. And anyone else who's listening who can remember the 80s will know how far we have come as a society, eh? And I grew up and I got some fairly standard messages of the day. I didn't think that I was supposed to feel any emotions I'd associate with vulnerability or weakness, that I should always be able to stand on my own 2 feet, that I shouldn't feel stress or pressure or anxiety or worry or fear or any of those things. And also I grew up thinking that the measure of the man was your capacity for violence and your willingness to take physical risk. And part of that was the people I grew up around, and this wasn't an uncommon thing at the time, they were people who placed value on that stuff. Being tough, that was seen as something that was respected by your peer group for me growing up. And I was always someone who wanted to belong and be accepted, and that was the vehicle for me. And again, it wasn't unusual in terms of the norms of the time. Unfortunately, though, some of the people I associated with were people who came from intergenerational gang membership. There was a lot of really antisocial behaviour, and one of the things I think we often miss as adults and as people is just how impacted we can be by the situation we're in our peer group. I think if you're in a healthy situation, it's very easy to sort of like imagine that, your good choices and your good outcomes are all because of you and who you are, and fail to recognise just how beneficial your situation is for you. And it's easy to sort of look at other people and go, oh, well, that's them, that's a character flaw, or that's some issue about who they are as a person, rather than going, well, actually, if I was in these set of circumstances, if these had been my experiences to date, I might be behaving in the same way. And so for me growing up, got all those messages, then hit my teenage years, started to experience those unpleasant emotions that make you feel vulnerable, and thought there was something wrong with me, didn't think I was supposed to feel these. And when I looked around at my peer group, at my friends, I didn't see anyone else feeling this stuff. So I thought, well, there's definitely something wrong with me, it's just me. Of course, what I now recognise is that I was doing a false comparison. I was comparing my inner experience with what I saw from people on the outside, and it's not the same thing. One of the exercises I love to do when I do workshops with people these days is to get them to do an exercise where they're talking in pairs about their best and their worst days in general. And a key idea and a key takeaway people get from this is, the struggle's real for all of us. It's normal to have bad days. It's normal to wonder about our situation and whether things couldn't be different or easier. That's the normal experience. Whereas when I was growing up, I didn't realise that the struggle was real for all of us. I thought this was all just me. And so I did what a lot of people in my era did, and that was alcohol and drugs as a type of self-medicating. And as I progressed further into my teenage years, I just got further into alcohol and drugs and criminality. And one of the things that had caused me to feel those emotions too is that my mum, who was the one source of potential softness and support in my life, was in the process of dying. And it wasn't something I had the skills or the tools to deal with. And she lived longer than expected. She was diagnosed as terminally ill when I was about 13, but she ended up living until I was 18. 3 days after she died, I chose to catch up with a drug dealer. What I didn't realise when I chose to catch up with him was that he had an aggressive interest in adolescent boys and sex acts. And what he didn't realise when he chose to catch up with me was that violence was my comfort zone. Also as well, I was someone who had experienced some really minor sexual abuse myself when I was younger, and it's really important to say that from my perspective that it was really minor, because I didn't experience anything like some of the horrendous trauma that our tamariki, that our kids experience in New Zealand, particularly where there's a betrayal of trust from someone who's supposed to be close to them. That stuff is so terrible and impactful on kids, and it's so common. And I didn't experience that, but I still had an experience where I did the same thing that kids and young people do. I thought, this must have been about me and because of me. This was my fault in some way. And as a result of that, I overcompensated through my teenage years through violence to demonstrate no one could dominate me. But also as well, I carried around this sort of like weight of shame. Now, fortunately, as an adult, I've been able to do the work to go, oh, actually, that was nothing to do with me. That wasn't about me or because of me. That was someone else contaminating me with their inability to make good life choices. And as a result of that, I don't carry around that weight and that trauma and that sense of shame. However, I tell you what, a lot of us as adults haven't done that work, and we just get busy with our lives, and it continues to impact us negatively. In fact, what a lot of us don't know is the biggest cause of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder, is not combat or other things that we often think of, but is being the victim of sexual assault. And a big factor there that often keeps people in that sort of like, in that trauma and in that PTSD cycle is that idea that they've done something wrong, that this was about them and because of them. If you look at this in terms of the military and the Defence Force and how they deal with this stuff, they talk about that as what's called a moral injury. And again, it's where you feel you've done something wrong in this circumstance. Whereas one of the most powerful things people can do who had a similar experience to me is to realise nothing to do with you, not about you, not your fault in any way, shape or form. But that would be years ahead of me, Angela. What neither of us realised when we chose to catch up that day was what choices we'd make and where they would lead us. Before that day was out, he would be dead and I'd be spending the first night of what would be the next 10 years, 10 months behind bars in some of New Zealand's toughest prisons. And I just want to be really clear, the reason I went to prison for that long was because I chose to go significantly beyond what was required of me in terms of self-defence in that situation. There was a point where I defended myself. I could have allowed him to leave my house, and instead I chose to take actions that unnecessarily ended his life. So I don't want anyone listening to this to walk away thinking that I was some kind of like a person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time or anything like that. Absolutely not. I earned myself that place in the New Zealand prison system. And ironically and sadly, by the time I ended up in prison, I was well prepared to be effective in prison. It was the same rules that I had operated by and lived under on the outside, just in a more extreme, intense sort of environment. And I knew a lot of the people there because they were people I'd associated with on the outside. Yeah, and so it was through the journey of starting my education and starting to crack open the small world I lived in and realise that the stuff that I thought was a sign there was something wrong with me was just the human experience, and that there were all these other options for me, that I was really able to change my life.
Yeah, and I might pause there a little bit just to acknowledge some of the things you've shared. There's so much in just that 5 minutes you've shared, Paul. You talked about having to grow through grief, in facing the bereavement of the one softness and light in your life at that point in time. You talked about having to go through, horrific sexual abuse or assault, and that's something that can be very triggering for people listening in. And I want to share a really beautiful story that just yesterday, a parent of one of the users of Clearhead came up and shared some feedback to me and said, that they had been struggling with their child, not communicating with them. They had not a very great relationship. And the reason was because after finally getting a good therapist, the child realized they've blocked out that they were sexually assaulted 10 years ago. So they couldn't understand why they had all this rage. And 10 years later, they realized this. And now begins the healing journey. And unfortunately, you're right, that for that child, it was by someone that was a trusted in their trusted circle. So this happens more often than you expected, and it often happens by people that you trust. So unfortunately that happens. But so I think in anyone listening to what you've just shared, please, if this is triggering for you, there are professional help available. And like I said, Clearhead has clinicians that can help support that as well. And the other thing, obviously, I wanted to acknowledge is that it is very common for people to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. And as to your point, it's only until you start doing the self-work that allows you to then unpack all the trauma you've just described. And you actually described it in almost a way that it no longer has that hold on you anymore, and a lot of people hold that identity, that anger with them, but actually it's like holding a piece of coal. Like, the only person that's going to be burnt is yourself. So how can you do the self-work to let that go? I love to go there, Paul. Like, talk us through how you went from this person who lashed out against the world, lashed out against yourself, to this person that had that inflection point to say, actually, all of this is a prison in my mind, and I can do the work to let that go and then become the person I want to be. Talk us through how that part of that journey.
Yeah, awesome. Happy to do so. Just before I do as well, I just want to really make a comment or getting around that some people might be triggered by stuff I've shared. Remember earlier I mentioned that those emotions we experience, like the anxiety prior to logging in here and being able to do this, that those are signals our body is sending us. If you have a strong emotional reaction to some of the content I've shared, that is your central nervous system sending you a signal that there's work to be done here. And I cannot encourage you enough to make use of the clinicians that are available to you, through your relationship with this platform, because again, it's a sure indicator there's work to be done, and the benefit that you get from that is amazing. That's what that is. That's not a threat to be avoided. That's a challenge to be embraced. But it is something where, you need support from someone else. I can't say that enough.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to also make support of what you've just said, which is that often when some of us are out there, we are facing anxiety, we're facing depression. As you said, we put that blame on ourselves. We say, oh, we are faulty. There's something wrong with me. No, it's just your body giving you a signal that says something's not right. What can you do to act and fix that problem? That's all your body's trying to tell you. But yes, sorry, I'll pass it back to you, Paul.
No, it's just such a good point, because we just get these, and I mentioned the unhealthy messages I got growing up, which made me not actually understand what the signals were. Anxiety is about mitigating a future potential risk. Fear is about dealing with something that you're in the presence of that could be problematic for you, socially, physically, whatever. There's signals, but if you don't understand that, then you just think, oh, this is me, it's because of me. It makes me think too, and I'll get on this in the journey, but one of the most useful things that I do in order to be able to move away from who I thought I was and everything around that to who I try to be today is that I really try to adopt what's called a trauma-informed approach. Now, basically how this works is this: whenever we don't behave in a way we like, or someone else doesn't, our natural thing to do is to go, oh, it's their fault, it's because of who they are, or I'm not a good enough person. This is about me in some enduring way, and that's what shame is associated with, right? Shame is, I'm not good enough in some way, and I never will be. Whereas the trauma-informed approach is to stop going, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? And to start going, what experiences have I had? What experiences have other people had that have led them to this place where this is the way they respond? What experiences have I had that have prompted me to respond this way in my marriage, as a parent? And then what can I do differently going forward, and what can I learn from that? Because that trauma-informed approach gives you hope, because it's all about experience, and you can change experience, and therefore you can change how you behave. Whereas when we think this, oh my gosh, it's me, and I want you to think about that, I feel a bit emotional, because it's so bloody important. When you don't behave how you want to behave, and I do this all the time as a parent or husband, I'm regularly not who I want to be, right? What I feel there, it's not shame, that's not the signal I'm getting, it's not about me or because of me, it's guilt, and that's about my behaviour. And if I feel guilt, I feel really unpleasant about what happened, and I can recognise, this signal is guilt, then that's what motivation feels like going forward, to try and do better or be better or change my circumstances or behaviour. But when I can't recognise that, then my brain assumes the worst, and I go, oh, this is shame, it's about me and because of me. And it's such an important step, and it was for me in terms of changing my behaviours, to give myself hope, to accept that we're all on a journey of trying to get better.
I assume that you didn't always feel like that. So what was the turning point for you?
Yeah, no, so this is interesting, Angela, because I think what we like to do is we like to create a narrative which is about, like a Damascene experience. You see the light, and then that's it. You're radically transformed. But look, real change and growth is about small steps that are often non-linear. They're sort of like a bit roundabout, they're a bit sideways, they're a bit backwards, but they can take you a long way over time. And that's what it was for me. There were definitely sort of like milestones along the way. Like when I was in maximum security prison, I changed my mindset that learning could actually be something really beneficial for you. That it wasn't just something you did to get a job, which is what I always kind of thought growing up. And also as well, the experience of passing the first 2 papers I enrolled in through Massey. And so realising I was capable of studying at this level, because I didn't start my journey with the end in sight. I never even would have started had I gone, I'm going to do a doctorate in this. I started with the idea that I'm going to learn a bit of psychology. Massey University were the only people who offered it from a distance. Otherwise I wouldn't have enrolled at a university. I didn't think I was capable of studying that level. But over the first year study, I realised my brain was like the rest of my body. The more I exercised it, the stronger it got and the easier it was to use. And you know what? It's not supposed to be easy. You don't get physically stronger by sleeping on the bench press. You get it by experiencing appropriate resistance and then recovering and growing. And over the first year, I kind of realised, this is what I'm doing with my brain. And it really is true. If we have the right level of resistance and challenge, that's how we grow as people. You don't get more resilient, more able to cope from never experiencing struggle and stress. You get it from experiencing it, but then having that opportunity to recover and grow. And a big part of that recovery, Angela, is reflection. Now, I mentioned PTSD before, right? What I really wanted to talk to you about, and I know that you're keen on this too, is post-traumatic growth.
Yes, I love to do that. But maybe before you go into that, I'd love to kind of just share a reflection I just had while you're sharing that, which is obviously, Steve Jobs' quote, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. And I'm such a big believer that even the things that are bad for you, that at the time seem like horrific things, they are almost like a lesson, and so, which beautifully segues us into post-traumatic growth. I'm a big believer of it, and I love to hear your perspective of that.
Yeah, awesome. And can I just say, that word for me, lesson, that you just mentioned, that's what captures it. What a lot of us don't know is that coming out the other end of trauma and extreme adversity, and by the way, what constitutes trauma, what constitutes real adversity is different for different people, eh? We don't all have the same threshold there, but most of us are going to experience in some way, shape or form at different points in our life. And what makes the difference between coming out the other end of it and still being caught in that cycle of trauma responses that are associated with PTSD versus coming out the other end and experiencing post-traumatic growth, which is when you look at it and you go, that sucked at the time, but I actually feel that I'm better off as a human being as a result of it. The difference between those two things is often the ability to go, what did I learn from that experience? So people who have pure PTSD will often be people who see no discernible value in the trauma and the adversity they experienced, whereas people who will end up with post-traumatic growth, and by the way, they're not mutually exclusive, so you can still have nightmares and other PTSD related things and experience post-traumatic growth, but you will be way less impacted by those and they won't carry on for as long. And the difference between them is that ability to go, there was value in that. What did I learn from that? What was the lesson that I got there? Now, not everyone needs to go to maximum security prison in order to experience post-traumatic growth, fortunately. I say that as a taxpayer. I don't want to spend any more money on prisoners, but also in terms of other things, right? But a lot of people will be familiar with this. They'll know people, for example, or maybe themselves, who have had a health scare. Maybe they've had cancer and gone into remission, and as a result of that, they have a great deal more focus on what matters to them, and they expend way less energy on worrying about stuff that doesn't. That would be an example of post-traumatic growth in action. Not a great experience, you don't want to repeat it, but it's actually been beneficial for you in terms of the rest of your life. But all that stuff, years ahead for me, Angela, like I started studying, I realised I was capable of more than I previously thought possible. And as I studied, the things I was learning just opened my eyes. The original word educate, the Greek word, means to lead out of the darkness of your own ignorance. And that's what it did for me. And I think a key around that experience that it taught me again was not that I needed this big, long plan about who I wanted to become or what I wanted to achieve in my life, but rather I just needed to keep taking these small steps that were moving me in the right direction. We were talking about reflections before. Like I have a daily practice where I write reflections every day, and really short and brief. It's normally only a couple of lines, takes a minute or so, but it's an opportunity to make sure that I really extract all of the valuable learning I get on a day-to-day basis. And I can't emphasize that enough to people. It's such a good habit to get into. You see the Steve Jobs quote. Well, the original quote that I came across, which is very similar, is from the Dutch philosopher Kierkegaard. And he said, life can only be understood looking backwards, but must be lived looking forwards. And, that's what reflection does. It enables you to look backwards so you can propel yourself forward more effectively into that direction of who you want to be. And I mentioned before that I'm not always who I want to be. That's fine, because no one is. The journey for me and what I learned from prison and what I hold on to today is that the goal is progress, not perfection. It's about getting better, not being good all the time.
Yes.
Hey.
It's so true. And that's kind of a huge core part of what makes us mentally well, is that we do see a sense of progress. Like the top 3 reasons why people leave a job, it's not that, they're maybe not paid enough or that they don't like their coworkers. It's that they don't see a sense of progression in their career. So they say, okay, well, where else can I go so that I could feel satisfied in my job again? And so progress, whether personal or professional, is such a core part of that. And, one of the things that people don't understand about post-traumatic growth is that your mental health is, let's just say at this point here, and then you suffered the adversity, so it drops. So your mental health and well-being drops. But actually, if you are able to take the adversity as a learning point, your mental health actually will become at a higher state than it was before the adversity happens. It's like a rubber ball. You bounce on the floor. It bounces higher than where it was thrown.
Honestly, this is so important for people to know. This is really good for people to know too, right? Is in psychology, there's something called the stress is enhancing mindset. And it taps into what you're talking about there, Angela, because all of us are aware of all the terrible research around how negatively impacted we can be, health-wise and otherwise, from stress. Oh my gosh, it'll impact my sleep. It'll impact my wellness. I'll be more receptive to being sick. I'll get more heart disease. I'm more at risk of cancer. I'm going to struggle managing my emotions. That's all true. But check this out. Stress is what we've evolved to experience because it was incredibly valuable for our ancestors. When we experience stress in the moment, like we did earlier around the technical issues, or like when I had to get my wife to lob that hand grenade of that charger into the room, stress is how our body gives us the energy and the focus to take on tough challenges, to do meaningful stuff. So for those of you out here listening, I want you to experiment with this. Next time you start to feel that, the jitteriness, next time you start to feel that, I want you to go, it's go time. This is how my central nervous system, how my body is preparing me to take action in a meaningful way, to have the focus and the energy required. That is called the stresses enhancing mindset. And you know what we know from the research? People who are aware of the stresses enhancing mindset, the stress is what we've evolved to experience to help us take on challenges, are less likely to suffer the negative health outcomes associated with stress. So I want you to think about this.
And I think that's great. But look, the reality is time has been tough. What happens if, the stress that we're dealing with exceeds our resources that we have able to cope with it? What if, okay, I cope with one stressor, and then before I could even take a breath, a week later, another stressor, I lost my job, then I lost my parent, then I broke up with my boyfriend, and then, my car got broken into. What happens when people face that?
So what they call this polycrisis. You don't just have one crisis, but you've got all these different things going on. That's where we're in a different situation, because the type of like stress enhancing mindset I'm talking about, that's day-to-day sort of like level of stress. Like for me, that's the sort of mindset I try to adopt, right? If I'm trying to put my kids to bed and I'm experiencing non-compliance there because I've got young kids. And so I'm like, okay, challenge to be embraced, right? Energy, focus, what needs to be done. Whereas what you're talking about with that polycrisis is where we can really just get fully fatigued, And for me, the key things there is that nothing is more important than our recovery and being realistic that we are not going to be able to perform the normal tasks that we can to the normal standard during that period. My second book, Mental Fitness, is trying to communicate this stuff, because if you think of it like fatigue, which is comparable to physical fatigue, the stress enhancing mindset's great. That's that kind of like, okay, yep, run to that next hill. It's hard. It's all good. This is how I get better. Ooh, energy, focus. But when you experience a massive like acute load or period like that, it's kind of like you've been injured. Stop going for jogs. Maximize on recovery right now. Who are the external resources available to you to assist you? This was part of the challenge for me growing up, Angela, is I had this mindset that I should just be able to take on whatever comes my way. No, you shouldn't. Because you are governed by the same laws of thermodynamics, mentally and emotionally, as you are physically. For energy out, there needs to be energy replaced, and that requires recovery. And I can't emphasize this enough. The more big things you've got going on, the more you need to be deliberate and strategic about what you jettison or park that might be fine in normal circumstances, but now will just become an additional tax on the precious energy you have, and the more you need to depend upon external resources and people to help get you back to where you need to be. But that's the irony, right? Is the harder we're hit, the less we feel like reaching out to others, the less we have the motivation to do so. And for my mind, that's one of the reasons it's so important that we do our absolute best to get in the habits and the circumstances that will help us in the tough times, and that we do that in the easy times. How do you learn to trust people again? There's a great question from Cully I just saw, right? Slowly, Cully. That's how you do it. You do it slowly. That sort of stuff is the stuff that requires, incremental progress and slow attempts to meet people and engage with people, and to also as well reflect on your experiences of people who haven't betrayed your trust. That's how you do it, slowly. But yeah, so again, Angela, I just want to validate that point, like if you've been hit that hard, recovery and support is what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing that we talk about, as clinicians is that, why do we prepare and go through simulations of a emergency situation? Is so that when we are in an emergency situation, we're not freaking out and thinking about, oh, what do I do next? Everything is almost like muscle memory. And that's what you've kind of sort of started to say, is that like you have to do these daily habits and practices before these crises happen, so that when they happen, you fall back into muscle memory. So maybe talk us through some of the habits and strategies that you apply or recommend others to apply to stay mentally fit.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's like, I want you to think about this, because I do think it's useful if you use like a fitness analogy here. So many of us have such demanding lives that it's comparable to being like a high-level athlete mentally and emotionally, right? Not only are we trying to excel at work, but also then we've got the stuff at home and all these other things. And so we really want to adopt that mindset of going, okay, well, we do pre-season work and we make sure we have the habits that put us in the best possible position to deal with the demands when we encounter them when it's go time, right? And what I would say there, and I just saw Ring's comment about my wife. My wife's an elite mountain biker, and so I get to see the reality of what athletes do on a daily basis. And actually that's really inspiring for me when I think about myself, because I try to get in those same habits but in a different way. I mentioned reflection. Here's one of the best things you can do for yourself. And I know this is not the first time you've spoken about this, Angela, but that's make sure your sleep's squared away. The most important thing we can do is to make sure that we're getting 7 hours as a minimum 80% of the time, so our brain has the capacity to recover and to replenish all of that beautiful dopamine and serotonin and all that other stuff that you've spoken about with other guests. If we're not getting 7 hours sleep 80% of the time, we're building on sand with anything else we do. And here's a real simple thing that you can do that helps you get better quality sleep on a regular basis, and that's get exposure to natural light within the first hour of being awake. So the first thing I do every morning when I wake up is go outside. Now I'm Wellington based, and that can sometimes be a challenge in terms of the weather. But what I know is that when I get exposure to natural light, and even if it's like a Wellington storm, it's just sitting by the window, what that does is it kick-starts the circadian rhythms in my brain that help me release the dopamine I need to have a high level of mood and motivation during the day, but it also helps me sleep better at night. So I get exposure to natural light within the first hour. I write reflections in terms of what I've learned from the last 24 hours or what's been interesting or noteworthy. Sometimes it's next to nothing, but sometimes it's gold. And I'll tell you something else I do, which a lot of your tuner-inners will have heard of, and that is I do a gratitude diary. I go from the last 24 hours, what are 3 small and different things that have been good. Now, a lot of the time, like people during COVID, and that was recommended in terms of mental health, that you do like a gratitude checklist. What are all the things I'm grateful for? That's great from a triage perspective, right? In terms of going, actually, my life's not so bad. But what you want to do from a habitual perspective is you actually want to go small and different things each day. And the reason for this is that over time, what it does is it recalibrates your radar mentally, and you start to notice more of those small good things as they happen. And it's when you notice them, when they happen, that you actually get the benefits of them in terms of your happiness and well-being, not so much when you're writing the list. That writing the list is to train your brain to start to pay more attention to this stuff. And so I do that every day. And you know what? Out of those 3 good things, and if I look at my list and I go, okay, what were the ones I wrote from yesterday? Well, talking to my kids last night and hearing them chat, that was one of the things. But one of the 3 things that I write every day will be in relation to my wife. And I'll tell you why that is. In our personal relationships, it's so easy to get to a point where we just start to focus on things that annoy us or that we find challenging. Whereas what I make sure that I do every day is I write about one small thing that I'm grateful for that my wife's done or that from being around her in the last 24 hours. And because what that makes me do is that makes me sure I am not losing sight on how fantastic this woman is and having her in my life. Because I know all of you know this, that it's really easy to lose sight of that stuff. And so I have those habits. The sunlight, it helps me sleep, which I need. It's the building block. It also boosts my dopamine during the day. The reflection, it helps me learn. It helps me progress. The 3 good things, it helps me really be bloody grateful for my life and the people in it. But I'll tell you something else that I do, and this is something cool to know, is I conduct different experiments every 21 days. And so that'll be part of my reflection is, what day is this for my experiment and how is it going? And so, for example, the experiment I'm conducting at the moment, which I'm just starting today is the day, and that's this. And that is not allowing myself to eat all of that good, comfort food I so desire once the kids are in bed for 15 minutes. Because what we know from the research is if you can resist the impulse for 15 minutes, the impulse will tend to fade. And so my experiment for the next 21 days is the 15-minute principle, right? I'll feel the desire, and before I get on the Uber Eats app or go have a look in the fridge, then what I'll do is I'll go, okay, I'm setting the timer for 15 minutes. And then afterwards I'll decide whether I'm going to actually do this. And that's the experiment I'm starting today. But I've done all sorts of experiments. Like, are people familiar with cold water? Do we get some cold water exposure? We heard about this for boosting dopamine, so you get more mood and motivation. So here you go. Here's an experiment I did recently, Angela. Is I used to do that as part of my morning routine. And you have a warm shower and then finish cold and but then you get that dopamine boost afterwards. But to be honest with you, I don't need additional dopamine in the morning. In the morning's when I bring my A game. So I experimented with doing it in the evening so that I would have more mood and motivation, a bigger boost to put the kids to bed. And that was a really effective experiment. So standards, sunlight, reflection, 3 good things, but then I throw in an experiment every 21 days just to keep that learning mindset.
That's awesome. And you sort of alluded this at the start of your journey, which is that you grew up with not the right people around you, which made you view the world in a way and take actions in the world in a way that was consistent with those people that you were spending time with when you were growing up. And of course, Jim Rohn said you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
Yes. Yes.
And I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on how did you shift your network? Because a lot of us can be stuck in groups where we know they're not good for us, but they've known us all our lives. They're comfortable. It's too scary to make new friends. Everybody's too busy with their kids and their jobs. I'd be keen to understand how you move away from social networks that are not good for you in order to be able to live the life that you want.
Yeah, it's interesting, eh? I just want to acknowledge as well that there would have been people I associated with when I was younger who would look at me and go, well, hey, you were the one of the bad influences on me. So I don't think it's like that I was just, everyone else is bad around me. Hey, you all bloody contribute to each other, and then it just becomes this terrible sort of like loop, right? That sort of cycle and that reinforcing feedback. So I do want to acknowledge that to anyone who spent time around me when I was younger. We were probably equally badly influencing each other, right? And I think the thing where I was lucky in terms of changing my social networking group, Angela, is that it was pretty clear that I needed to make changes in that respect. And so when I got out of prison, I just made the very deliberate choice that I wouldn't associate with anyone who I'd been in prison with or that I knew from prior to prison in terms of a criminal lifestyle. And that was everyone I knew, basically. That was all of my friends and the rest of it. But one of the things I always recommend to people coming out of prison, and this is useful for people tuning in today as well, and that is make a deliberate choice about a group or a community that you can become part of that is positive and that gives you a sense of identity and connection outside of your life as it is now, outside of your immediate family, outside of your colleagues. And this can be different things for different people. So say, for example, I was into exercise. When you're in prison, you exercise a lot because it helps keep you safe. The more physically capable you are, the less likely you are to be attacked by other people who are just looking for an easy target. So I was very fit when I got out of prison, and I went and played sports, and then I got into the gym, and that's why places like CrossFit and F45 and other group-related training are so popular, because they have this sense of tribe for people. Go find your tribe somewhere and do that without just cutting off everyone else in your life first, so that you have this kind of like bridge of connection. Don't just go, all of these people are leaving me behind. And I love that quote, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Don't just jettison and abandon everyone and then figure out you're in the ocean by yourself in the dinghy. Go and find a group, a community that you can be part of, where you get those connections and that sense of identity, and then you'll just find that you'll just have less and less time for those people. They'll just slip out of your life, the ones who you're currently relying on now. And I'll tell you, like, a really big indicator there is if people don't want the best for you and support and encourage your successes, those are not people you want to be around. Now, you might have some family members like that you can't jettison, but you want to be really clear about whose opinion matters to you and whose doesn't. And I think that can be a good bridge point too, Angela. Like for me, I spent so much of my life when I was younger worrying about the opinions of people who didn't care about me and who weren't positive, but I worried about their opinions. A real turning point for me in my life now is the ability to go, actually, I'm only really concerned about the opinions of a very small subset of people. My wife, my dad, a couple of other people in different areas. I really want to pay attention to what they have to say. I want to be concerned about their opinion. Even if I disagree with it, I really want to be concerned about it or positively impacted by it. But the rest of the world out here, particularly people who don't really care about me or want the best for me, I can feel the sting of some criticism and other such things. But I'll move on from that very quickly because I'll remind myself that these are not people whose opinions truly matter to me. And as an exercise for those people tuning in, and here's a good one you can do, get a piece of paper, like a post-it note, just a tiny piece of paper, and write down the names of the people whose opinions truly matter to you. And it will be a very small list. These will be people who want the best for you, who genuinely care about you. That doesn't mean they're not annoyed by you. That doesn't mean that, they don't find you annoying and want you to change in some ways, but they do accept you and love you and want the best for you. And if you're writing more than about 3 or 4 names, you're being too generous. And the next time you're worried about these opinions or social rejection or criticism or feedback or anything, just remind yourself when you feel this, oh, you're not on my list actually, and just move on a bit quicker.
100%. Well, I mean, you talk about focusing on 4 areas of your life, relationships, thought patterns, physiological well-being, and environmental influence. I think we've touched on a lot of those points already. Is there anything else you want to share about one small thing that we can do to improve on any of these areas that you haven't touched on already?
Yeah, I think a key thing is to go back to what I said before. The goal here is progress, not perfection. And what you really want to do, what's incredibly useful to you, is to recognize that your only measure of progress and success is who you were yesterday and who you're going to be tomorrow. And that no one else is your benchmark. No one else is a comparison for you. We've evolved to compare ourselves to other people because when we were members of tribal society, it was really important to see, well, which little subset of the tribe can I add value to? And where should I actually not worry about because there's already other people doing that, and therefore how can I make a meaningful contribution? It was useful for our ancestors. Whereas now what we do is look at things like social media and compare ourselves to people in a way which is incredibly unhelpful. Whereas what we want to do, we want to identify who we want to grow into, and then we want to start just comparing ourselves and measuring ourselves based on small incremental bits of progress in our own lives, not compared to anyone else, because no one else is you. I know it sounds like, woo-woo to go, you're the unicorn, but you really are. Like, Angela, I want you to think about this. No one like you has ever existed. Your unique combination of DNA from your maternal side and your paternal side has literally never existed. There has never been one like you. And then you throw into the mix that unique genetic combination your life experiences, your strengths, your development. There's never been one like you. So why on earth would you compare yourself to anyone else? Stop doing that. So there's some key things that I think are incredibly helpful.
I mean, basically the saying is comparison is the thief of joy, isn't it? And so,
yeah,
we can always be like, I just got a pay rise. Oh, but then I'm going to compare it to my friend who had a bigger pay rise. And then suddenly that pay rise doesn't give me the joy anymore, right? So so important not to do that. Can I
just say one other point? Sorry, Angela. I just want to say one other point on that just before you move on, and that's this. Accept who you are, though, as well, in terms of some of the things that are hard. Like I talk about, don't do that social comparison. But I'm like an egomaniac, right? And I always compare myself socially. So what I actually try to do is I go, hey, listen, I know intellectually I just want to focus on myself. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to limit how much I expose myself to other people who I do compare myself with. I'm not going to get notifications on Facebook or LinkedIn and stuff. I'm just going to worry about my world and me. And so again, knowing the idea intellectually doesn't mean that you always succeed emotionally. So that goes back to that setting up the situation where you can just focus on yourself and not be comparing yourself to others. So sorry, Angela, interrupted you.
No, and I think that's a really good segue to obviously the theme of this talk, which is that, we put ourselves in the prison of our minds. And even something as simple as comparing ourselves to others is a form of prison that we've put ourselves through. Maybe you could share with us, the 5 steps to freedom that you described in your TED Talk to free ourselves from the prison of our mind.
Yeah, I think the first one is crucial that I talk about, is recognizing that you're born free. Like as people, so much of the things that end up worrying us and increasing the misery and suffering in our lives are not things that are inherent to us as members of the species, but are things that we've developed as we grow up in an attempt to understand the world and who we need to be to belong and be accepted. But on the basis of that, we can choose to engage in the next step, which is to break free of that stuff, to recognize, hey, we've developed these mental habits over our lives that hold us back, that increase our misery and suffering, but actually we can choose to do something about it. We can choose to take the steps that will actually limit the impact of those thoughts and beliefs on us. Now again, I do want to come back to that idea that the goal is progress, not perfection, right? That what we're trying to do there is limit the impact of those thoughts and beliefs. We're never going to entirely remove them in all circumstances with all people, but if we get better at stepping back at recognizing them and truncating and minimizing their impact on us, that's the real journey, eh? And so, once we decide to escape that mental prison, then the steps there are about really maintaining the progress and being able to carry on that path. And I've got to tell you this, I had certain mental prisons that I grew up with when I was younger that I escaped. However, it's kind of like I've gotten out of this perimeter fence. Now I realise there are other things holding me back. And I think over my life, I'm just going to be getting better at expanding my world and being less held back. But there will always be things to work on. I don't know anyone who's sitting at the top of their mountain who's like, I am exactly who I want to be in all circumstances with all people. That's kind of like imagining that you're going to get to a certain level in your career, right? I just got this promotion, fully self-actualized now. Now I'm a perfect person. That is not how it works. You don't get to 60 or 70 or 80 and self-actualize. It is an ongoing journey of getting better, and better never stops.
That's amazing. I mean, look, we've covered so many things. Is there anything that you feel is core to what you advocate for that you haven't had a chance to share today yet?
Yeah, just one thing which sort of taps into some stuff that we discussed a little bit earlier. Often a lot of us have this idea about progress in terms of our career. Remember you mentioned that, the importance of that sense of progress. It's a fundamental driver for us as a species. We need it for our well-being. But check this out. The areas of your personal life that matter as well are also areas that require investment and progress. One of the big things I try to do with my life this year is to go, why don't I invest just a little bit of the energy I do in my professional advancement and career and get better in terms of being a husband and a parent? Because actually at the end of the day, those are the things that matter most to me. Yet I have this unhelpful idea that, oh no, those are supposed to be easy. I should just be able to relax and it's all good. No, that's not true. I definitely need to be able to use those as environments for recovery, but also I need to be able to go, let me invest some time and energy in being better for these people. Not just my colleagues, not just my clients, but the people who truly matter most to me. Let's do them the justice of investing a bit of time and energy in those relationships too.
Amazing. Well, we like to end these sessions with one simple question. Paul, what is your one well-being practice that helps you stay well?
Routine. And I know that's multiple, but I mentioned what they were. Consistent routine. That's the big thing for me. If I had to say one, I'd say exercise, but consistent routine. I'm trying to get heaps in there. Routine. Get a routine. Follow a routine.
And I think people don't recognize as well is that sometimes something just works really well for you at this point in time, and then sometimes it's not as effective, and then you just try something else instead. What you want to develop over time is a toolkit of different things that has worked for you. And okay, if this is not working for you right now, let's try this other thing. You might not always need to go to therapy, but hey, this 3 bad things happened to me at one time. I feel incredibly overwhelmed. Normally, I would have the strength to work through them, but I just don't at the moment. It's okay to not say that you're a failure and just say, okay, I'm going to ask for extra help. And, like I said, Clearhead provides access to really great clinicians, and as an EAP provider, if your employer uses us, you can get free therapy through us. So really don't suffer alone. I think, Paul, your story is about saying that even when you were starting off with not the best start, even when you got to prison and associate yourself with really, difficult people who might not care for you or want the best for you in your life. I'm just saying, how do I politically correctly say this? But also just, get, and then actually, despite it all, be such a light for others, be such a light for the people you love, and just have such a core strength and value to you that, I don't know, it's just joyful just to talk to you, even if we started this chat really stressed out. So thank you for taking the time to walk us through a real life lesson of how to apply these skills in the real world.
Yeah, awesome. Ngā mihi nui in terms of giving me the opportunity, and thanks so much to all of those of you who tuned in. If you see me walking down the street somewhere in New Zealand, come and say g'day, okay? But yeah, wish you all the very best, and again, thank you for the opportunity. It's stuff that matters, eh?
That's it for today's episode. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, check us out at myclearhead.com and drop us a message. Love our content? Share it with a friend or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you so much again for listening, and catch you on the next one.